Hello and welcome to our video for our 16th week of reading through the Bible, getting through the Bible in 1 year here at St. John's. And this past week you finished up the book of Judges, and this week we'll be moving into the book of Ruth and also the first part of 1 Samuel as we also continue moving through the book of Acts as well. In getting ready for this previous week's readings, I'd asked you to continue the list of Israel's judges and to think about highlighting some examples of the motto that's repeated again and again throughout the book of Judges. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. The list of judges ends up with 12 from the book of Judges. I've got them written down here. Correct me if I'm wrong. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Tola, Jair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and Samson. Now we will have a couple more people who are listed as judges in the book of 1 Samuel, but we typically regard these 12 as the ones who are Israel's judges during the time of the judges. And then as to that motto, in those days Israel had no king, everyone did as he saw fit. There are a few stories, especially near the end of the book of Judges, that highlight that fact. You have the story of the Levite Micah who constructs his own idol out of some silver that his mother entrusts to him. Why in the world is a Levite making an idol? You have that very terrible incident with the Benjamites misusing the concubine of another Levite. Why does a Levite have a concubine, and why are the Benjamites committing such sexual sin? And this leads to a civil war. Things are very much, I sometimes describe them as the Wild West in Israel at this time. They have no king, so there is no central form of government to give justice to people and to instill order. And there are some other examples that you might cite too near the end of the book of Judges where the lawlessness of the people is highlighted by the fact that there is no king. Then the book of Acts, and not just the book of Acts, but also those last 3 chapters of the book of Luke that you read this past week. I asked you to consider looking at those chapters from the perspective of the Apostle Peter, and to see how Peter grew and developed in his faith through these incredibly important events. And I suppose you might have your own perspective on the emotions that Peter felt all along the way. Some of them are spelled out for us. Some of them we can kind of distill from how he acts. But I think we can summarize everything that Peter went through by saying we begin seeing Peter as a very bold person, but he is bold because he's confident in himself. And Jesus knows that self-confidence has to be knocked down a few pegs. And certainly Peter's confidence is knocked down to the point where he's almost despondent after he denies Jesus. He goes to extreme self-doubt and has to be built back up by Jesus. And Jesus does that then. And Jesus then, by entrusting the apostleship once again to Peter, gives Peter the ability to be confident once again and bold once again, but bold for a different reason. Bold because he is confident in his Savior. And that's the Peter that we see then in Acts chapter 2, delivering the Pentecost sermon that we know so well. So this coming week, you're going to move into Ruth. Read the entire book of Ruth and also the first 8 chapters of 1 Samuel. Ruth takes place during the time of the Judges, and as you've seen in the book of Judges, the nation of Moab rise up against Israel. You see how pointed it is that Ruth is from Moab and how she can be accepted into the family of Naomi and ultimately Boaz's wife is truly remarkable. And that leads into the question that I'd like you to consider for the book of Ruth and the first 8 chapters of Samuel. How is God setting the stage for the Savior to come into the world 1,000 years down the road through Ruth and 1 Samuel 1 through 8? And then in Acts chapter 3, starting with Acts 3 and going through Acts chapter 7, you see the workings of the early Christian church. a period of about less than a year when the church in Jerusalem grew and grew, and practically everyone who identified as a Christian was there in one place, worshiping together. It was not the way God intended things to remain forever, but in its incipient form, the Christian church was all together, and we see some really interesting things happen, even some surprising things happen. Think as you go through and see these different instances of the church interacting with other people and the interactions inside the church, what actions and attitudes of the early church should we strive to emulate today? God's blessings to you on your continued reading. We'll look forward to meeting on the last Saturday of this month, once again at 2 p.m. here at the church, and discussing in depth any of the questions that have come up in your minds through your readings. Thank you.